How well do you know yourself? How well do you think you know yourself? Let's start there. Please think about this for a moment or so. We are going to work with one specific Qultura universal principle. The principle and the process. This is the basic, most fundamental of the four universal principles. It is probably the most extensive. Existence is a principle. Creativity and interaction is a process. This is the basis of everything in existence. All existence is change. All existence is relationship. Everything is ultimately process simply because reality, existence and being all unfold or emerge in relationship to each other. Therefore, if we understand that everything is constantly unfolding or emerging into existence in being, we have a narrative. A narrative can either be a story or a process. The issue here is that, as small children, we are taught that a story has a beginning, a middle, and an ending. And they lived happily ever after. So we believe, right into adulthood, that we have a life story or narrative that has a beginning, a middle, and an ending. This is not necessarily true. On the one hand, in actual reality, we are part of a karmic process that is so multidimensional and complex that we cannot even begin to retell the narrative or story. Past karma, which is the karmic process of everything up to the present moment, contains many other different processes. You have the natural biological process of your body, which is not one single body which you go through all your life, but different versions of your body which reincarnates partially according to a code, a pattern, or rhythm. All biological cells die and are replaced every several months or years, and you cannot tell which parts of your body are the newer version or the older version. Not even a doctor can tell you. Sure, you may notice lost hair, shed skin cells, nail clippings, but this is insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Then you have the various brain processes and the subconscious processing required so that the various parts of your body are functioning together cohesively and fluidly as a complete organism. Then you have the constant reshaping and fluctuations of your brain itself relative to how you use it, how you use memory, and how you think and feel. This is known as neural plasticity. Your brain is semi-fluid mush, electromagnetic, so obviously it's not going to keep the same, consistent, solid shape. Within all this you have the direct experiences of the constant unfolding of reality, being in existence, once again according to a code, rhythm or pattern which you cannot really figure out, and if you could, you would struggle to make sense of it or put it all into language coherent enough for common logical understanding. On the other hand, in cultural reality, we get social conditioning, programming and the general progress of culture, cultural development and the evolution of social beliefs and attitudes. The source of the story or the beginning falls into once upon a time territory, and from a certain perspective it's pretty much a human drama and far less complex than the karmic process which manifests out of actual reality. From a certain perspective it would appear that this is a kind of unfolding dream that we somehow are all caught up in. From another perspective it appears that we are all playing imaginary characters in a social game rather like the board game Monopoly, only it's the real life version. The difference between the board game version of Monopoly and the real life version are the consequences. In the board game version of Monopoly, if you lose, then it's okay. The game will come to an end when there's just one player left, and all the pieces, money, houses and hotels, the chance and community chest cards go back into the box. But if the real life version we're all playing, you face the losses and have to accept the real life consequences. Now it is perfectly acceptable to see the social game for what it is and to play along with all the cultural allusions. But the issue here is that you're not given a script to follow the same way an actor is given a script. You are not given the rules of the social game, and many of the rules you are taught are cultural allusions designed to keep you in your place. It should not need to be explained to you, if you have reached a certain age, that society is not a level playing field. So we come to the ego, the most basic and immediate level of self. It is also the most superficial level of self, because it is based on a role and social identity. It's designed to be this way because the pattern or arrangement of social and cultural beliefs are designed to benefit organizations, institutions, the government and so on. The pattern of your society is not designed to be of benefit to you, the individual. Organizations and institutions are fixed entities, so the less cultural development and social progress made, the better it is for them. Please keep in mind that your ego is so superficial that you can fit most of it on your CV or whatever you create to find a job. 1, 2 of 3 sheets of paper. You are taught to develop a superficial ego because, like your name, you should be able to remember it and share it immediately and without hesitation if required by an organization. It does not include much of what you regard as yourself, nor does it have any relationship to the depths of your being. There is one thing you're never told about the ego. You are never told that your ego is not meant to last you throughout your life. It is only meant to last you as far as you become a somebody, a person who is somewhat established in society as a good model citizen deserving of widespread societal respectability. Many people make the mistake of trying to be their ego throughout their whole life. Let's be real with each other here. Maintaining an ego is hard work, because you have to constantly achieve different things to win self-esteem from other people. Another thing you need to know is that, while you are centered on your ego and not anywhere in your humanity and authentic self, you leave yourself wide open to being hurt, to being deceived, to being cheated. Not everybody understands that we're all playing a social game and role-playing an imaginary character. Whenever you play a sport or a game too seriously, people start getting hurt and injured. So too it is with the social game. Most of the trauma we experience in life comes from other people. Most of the issues in life we experience come from other people. Most of these people are either too attached to their beliefs and ideologies, or they're playing the game of life far too seriously. Now if you refer back to the principle and process meme under principle, you should find the focus of your conscious attention. The ego is based on this focus of conscious attention. In fact, we can say that the ego is the narrowest setting of the focus of conscious attention. You can shift the focus of your conscious attention so that it either narrow or broader. When you do this, your individual conscious perspective changes. It's like changing the focus on a camera. You can have a narrow focus, or a wide focus. Where you set your own focus is where you center yourself. Qultura methodology has 4 components. The principle and process is one of 4 universal principles, presented as simple memes, in the second component. The 4th component is called in-mind. In this 4th component called in-mind, the principle and the process changes to core being. This is because it is assumed that you have developed enough mystical awareness to understand the relationship between the principle and process in core being. Who you really are and always have been is your Jivatman, which is the supernatural entity that manifests through your movements, body language and voice. But the Jivatman is spirit, and is not something you can get to know, particularly while you are living and attached to a physical body, or incarnate. In the West we call this the soul. Core being or the real self is somewhere between your ego and Jivatman. This is what is understood, in Qultura terms, to be your principle. It's a much deeper layer of being or self than your ego. Please keep in mind that you are born into an incarnation which gives you a finite physical body, a finite amount of energy, and a certain amount of time. It is believed that a human life cycle is 84 years, or 1008 cycles of the moon. But your life is not a linear process, because the principle and the process is cyclical. Reality is not just reality, because there are different levels of reality. There isn't just consciousness, there's multiple planes of consciousness. Just as there are different levels of reality and different planes of consciousness, there are different levels of being. Self is incredibly multidimensional. Human beings have been playing about with directed thought and in the focus of conscious attention for roughly 10,000 years. The entire focus of this conscious attention is on the physical and material planes of existence, the physical body, the psychological and intellectual plane, and not much more. For centuries religion has been the sole authority on the metaphysical, everything else is occult, hidden, obscured, and with its stories and tales of metaphysical certainty cannot be relied upon to lead you anywhere significant. The entire focus of society is on material possessions, money, the ego, role-playing and imaginary social status. Let us not forget also, that once you reach the peak of your life cycle, say when you reach your 30s and 40s, the rules of the social game change. The emphasis of the social expectations of ego shift from the future and who you will become, to the past and who have you been. People will expect you to know something, to have achieved something, and to have done something with your life. Nobody tells you this. If you do not own sufficient property, or have acquired sufficient enough financial and material wealth, as many people don't, then you are going to need some kind of narrative or story. Without a family or narrative, As you go through your 50s and 60s, you will be generally seen as less socially relevant, useful, and so will start becoming more invisible and less significant. When you are in your late 50s, your ability to change or influence anything will drop off a cliff. Neither your ego nor your social conditioning is meant to last you throughout your entire life. Your ego has a very limited shelf life. It's only meant to give you enough time to figure out the physical aspects of your existence. At some point in your life, you are meant to dig deeper, explore, and find out who you really are beyond the narrow confines and limited belief systems of the ego. Your ego is not real in anything more than a basic, cultural sense of reality. But who are you in terms of actual reality? In the dynamic relationship between reality, existence and being, who are you? Let's keep in mind that both death and reincarnation exist. If we were to simplify the different planes into three broad planes, the subconscious, actual or regular consciousness, and the superconscious, we can talk about simple levels of consciousness. Level 1 would be the subconscious. Level 2 would be actual or regular consciousness. Level 3 would be the superconscious. If you are centered on your ego, on the narrow focus of your conscious attention, you would be centered in your subconscious. Your center of self would be on level 1. Your Jivatman or soul would be centered at least on your superconscious. If this were possible, you would be centered on level 3. If however you would be centered in your actual or regular consciousness, and therefore centered on your senses and felt sense of immediate experience, you would be centered on level 2. Please keep in mind that where you center yourself in terms of self determines your principal or individual conscious perspective. Where you center yourself also determines your perception of reality. On level 1 you emphasize the physical and the material. On level 3 you would emphasize the spiritual and metaphysical. On level 2 you emphasize sense, sensitivity, the felt sense of immediate experience, and you would have a balanced perspective between the ego and the Jivatman, and between the physical and the metaphysical. Core being in N-Mind is level 2. N-Mind, the fourth component of Qultura methodology, refers to a state of being, N-Mind. This is a state of not thinking, but sensing and feeling. Your focus is not thought and the mind, your focus is the senses and the felt sense of immediate experience. Please keep in mind that just because you perceive reality on one level or two levels such as actual reality and cultural reality, does not mean that other levels of reality don't exist. They exist just as different planes of consciousness and levels of being exist. For example, when you die and become disembodied, your mind and perception shifts to other levels of reality and cultural reality shifts into the subconscious. I use the analogy of a dial on wavebands on an analog radio. Thought is based on energy. Your thoughts don't fade into nothing, because energy cannot be created or destroyed. Thought fades into reality. The focus of conscious attention is focused on a level of reality determined by the frequency of the thought. They are reflected back into the environment and build up into residual energy. You might be focused on, say, a frequency of 103. Someone else might be focused on 88.2. Someone else might be focused on 93.6. It is a common misconception that life and death are two separate states of being. They're not. There is such a thing as a life-death interface. You are never completely born, and you never completely die. You are always in this life-death interface. Your different incarnations merge and blend into an afterlife, and this afterlife becomes part of your new incarnation. Through the karmic process you experience reality from your previous incarnations. The metaphysical is not as indeterminate or random as you think it is. There is also scale and dimension. Sleep is just death on a much smaller scale. Just as you experience one day, go to sleep and experience a new day, where aspects of the previous experience of previous days also manifest, the same is true of death and incarnations of living existence. Being awake on a Friday, you may experience a reality or insight from the experiences you had on the Tuesday. The same thing happens between different incarnations. It does not matter how you were socially conditioned or what pattern or construct of social and cultural beliefs you were raised in, you will no doubt have experiences which manifest outside that form of cultural reality. Just because you were socially or culturally tuned into, say, a talk radio station on 94.8, does not mean that the music radio station at 99.2 does not exist or you are unable to tune into that. We are socially conditioned to believe that the physical realm of existence and reality is the basis for reality, but this is not true. Yet through your direct experience and senses you encounter things which defy physical existence. You can go to a neighborhood and sense that something is off. You can even pick up vibrations from another person that something is off. You can be in a completely new place yet sense familiarity and a sense of déjà vu. What you are picking up on is the residual energy built up from the thoughts, perceptions and experiences of other people. Then we have the subject of dreams and dreaming. We generally have dreams when we are in deep sleep. We are relatively unconscious because we are asleep. However, the fact that we dream indicates that we are experiencing a different level of reality and we also exist on another plane of consciousness. This is why we can have interactions with dead relatives and the interaction will seem real, even when it isn't. There is no physical reality in our dreams, but it seems that there is. Time is unimportant in dreams, and whatever time perception there is distorted. We can have a discussion as to which level of being we are in to experience the dream. It may be level 2 or it may even be level 3. But it is definitely not level 1. The difference between the more physical level or plane of level 1 and the more conscious level or plane, or level 2, is the difference between determined and probable. Level 2 a regular consciousness is probability, not determined, which is why there is no such thing as a metaphysical certainty. But we can access level 2 in regular consciousness, not just because we have the internal architecture to do so, but also because it's our most natural level and the level we were born with. We have different experiences from this level 2 plane of consciousness. We can recognize an event which later happens in physical reality. When we experience despair, we figure out a solution or a way forward without needing to think about it. People who are creative such as artists, writers and musicians, talk about ideas that flow through them. We talk about having visions. Indeed, it is possible to connect different planes of consciousness just through being on this level 2 plane of consciousness when we are centered in what is termed in the in-mind of Qultura core being. But we are conditioned to deny and dismiss such experiences as imaginary, mystical nonsense, or illusory. This is because through social conditioning we are conditioned to focus on the ego and the physical, material levels of reality and planes of consciousness. As a result, our center is downgraded from core being and principle to the ego. We center ourselves on our egos as a result. So then we have to think about where does the energy from our thoughts, beliefs and thinking go. Thought is a physical phenomenon. It's based on energy and energy vibrations. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. Therefore, energy doesn't vanish. It simply transforms. The probability here is that thoughts that we express outwards, whether carried by words or not, make up the residual energy of our environment and thus eventually become part of the post-death experience, just as, in the same way, the thoughts and beliefs we express make up our experiences in dreams. You see, what you express outwards through energy, through thought, through belief and speech will always come back to you. This is part of natural law, because it is part of karma and reincarnation. Please keep in mind that the universe functions on the principle of fragmentation and reflection. This is what makes the narrative so very important, because the narrative is your perception of process, or the process in the principle and the process. If you are centered in your ego, and therefore on level 1 in the basic and immediate physical realm, you will perceive a lot less than if you are centered on your core being in level 2. By the time you reach the later stages of your life, you really need to be centered in core being in level 2 so you can handle the transition through death from one incarnation to the next incarnation. If you are still centered on ego and in level 1 at the end of your life, death will be a far more bewildering and confusing experience. I am pointing this out because ultimately, you have to decide for yourself where you center yourself. Nobody else can tell you where you need to center yourself because they are not you. They do not have your perspective. They are not tuned into the same frequencies of reality, existence and being as you are. Outside of the thoughts you express and the language you use, nobody else can tell you where you are centered. You can read as many holy scriptures and go through the practices of religion as you wish, but you still remain centered on ego and on level 1. It is also important to understand the Qultura system for what it really is. Qultura is just a system to get you from level 1 in your ego to level 2 in your core being. In this way, Qultura is a tool for developing insight and conscious awareness. But it is down to you to understand your narrative, develop the mystical awareness, and participate in the community enough to become level 2 in core being. Community participation in Qultura is simply to develop the narratives and develop awareness of those narratives through primary social interaction. Through community participation you cleanse the energies which form part of the reality of your post-death experience and afterlife. From the perspective of the conditioned mind, this may seem like mystical nonsense, but please remember that, when we are thinking about death in the afterlife experiences, all we have to work with are probabilities and not certainties. Therefore it makes sense to be centered on your core being at some point before you die.